Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Case. This is a podcast where global leaders from Harvard Business School's OPM community join in a personal capacity and they share the real lessons, life principles, mental models that go behind building enduring companies. Today's guest is Koby Jones. Koby is from OPM 65. We connected a few months ago. We tried to arrange for a conversation, but you know, very hectic schedule. So I'm glad we're finally able to do this, Koby. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sahin. It's really a pleasure to finally meet with you. And as you know, it's 8 a.m. my time, and it's, I think, 6 p.m. your time over in New York. So, yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. Koby, how do you introduce yourself to the audience today?
Look, yeah, I started my business about 15 odd years ago. My background's primarily global financial markets and private wealth management. I worked at three of the four major banks here in Australia before I moved to a boutique firm for a relatively short period of time. And then I founded my company about 15 years ago. I think, as you know, entrepreneurship, it's not just about your value proposition, your business model. The world doesn't owe you anything, but it's just more the personal challenges. So when I started my business, I actually sold the family home and used that capital to start that business. I had three young kids at the time. I say had young kids because my daughter is 22 and a half. She's just finished her psychology degree and been accepted into a law commerce degree and works with me part-time while she studies full-time. My son will be 21 next month. He he also works with me part time and studies full time. He's doing commerce, and then my younger son, he's 19 back in March, and he also works with me part time and studies full time. He's more into technology, but he ultimately wants to get into the military. But I just share this with you, see him, because when you're starting a business, you definitely shoulder most of that responsibility. But it is very much a team effort, and so I'm very grateful for their support throughout my journey in establishing the organisation. One thing that I did too through that process of establishing the business is I chose to use my own capital, and I've never raised any external capital. I've got no corporate debt, and so bootstrapping an organisation over 15 years is quite challenging. It's certainly not an easy exercise, but we've grown to a point where we're about 30 odd staff and we generate very healthy revenue. As you know, too, when you're bootstrapping something, you're always juggling, the I guess the desire to ensure that you're always in the black. You're not in the red, so you always, you've got net profit. But that just also means that you take a very much a different approach. You're a bit more disciplined, you're a bit more frugal, and your thought processes and your decision making very much are long term. I mean, aspirationally, I want to have my kids not only stay in the business now, but I do want them to leave at some point and get external experiences, but just come back at some point. And for me, that's leaving a legacy for them. But yeah, it's certainly starting a business and bootstrapping. It's not for everyone, but it's certainly a hockey stick. It's funny too, Sahin, when I say I sold the family home, started the business, for the first 3 years, I didn't pay myself a salary. And then when I did pay myself a salary in the fourth year, I paid myself like $1,000 a month. And then I felt grateful enough to double that in the fifth year to $2,000 a month. But it's kind of kept sort of doubling ever since. So there's that compound effect. But also being privately held, it just means you've got a lot more flexibility and freedom to make different choices versus having external capital, private equity, family office, whatever, I guess, determining your direction of the organization. I don't think anyone knows my company better than I do, and therefore I should be making the decisions on behalf of the organization and the people in it.
Do your children recognize the significance of the effort you've taken here, bootstrapped a company? Do you have a conversation around this with them?
Not specifically. I think one thing you do as a dad is you, I guess, you provide and you protect, your children. You also want to invest in them in terms of values and disciplines and, focus and goals and aspirations. I don't know if the kids fully understand and or appreciate the I guess the sacrifice and the opportunity cost that is attached to bootstrapping something. I do hope that they understand that in time. They're just hitting their early 20s, and that's also a very interesting period that I'm going through with them. They're challenging me and they're questioning me, and they want their own identity and their own levels of freedom. So I'm going through that challenge, right now, personally with the kids. I love them very dearly, but part of that love means that I've also got to step back myself as a father and allow them to make their own mistakes and explore the world without me, without my input and decisions. So it's a very challenging time in some respects. I'm not saying I'm a helicopter father or anything like that and put them in cotton wool. In fact, I was fairly, I'm one for tough love. So I was fairly intense with them growing up, and I certainly invested a lot in terms of conditioning them and preparing them for the real world. But it's a really interesting time that they're going through, and I'm going through, watching them go into adulthood and standing their own 2 feet. But I don't know how much they fully either appreciate, understand, or recognise the amount of sacrifice that's attached to starting up a business and then doing it, without any external capital, no corporate debt. It truly is a real challenge.
And was it their natural inclination to maybe be part-time involved with your business, or were you actively trying to recruit them and poach them into, getting some exposure to your side of the world?
Yeah, so it's so funny you say that. I mean, look, my business is in funds management services. So we provide what we call trusteeship, fund administration, registry, custody, and licensing services. So a lot of middle and back office services to funds and fund managers. And we deal with, venture capital funds, private equity funds, private credit funds, property funds, listed, unlisted funds, feeder funds, funder funds. There's all different iterations of funds. And I just mentioned that because them growing up, they didn't fully understand what I did. And so I don't think they've come out of their high school and said, I know what dad does and I want to work with him. It's really been through primarily my encouragement, but also just a product of employment conditions here in Australia. So Australia, as we were talking about before, has got very high standards, a great lifestyle, highly regulated, fairly educated society. And that means that there's a lot of competition. And so sometimes getting an entry point into a professional services firm, it's not an easy thing. But if you've got networks, if you've got connections, that certainly helps. So them leveraging my, organisation is something that I certainly want to give to them. And I think it's only through time that they've really started to enjoy the work environment, because they fully understand, what we do and the type of clients and the stakeholders. I even share with them the financials. So I've organised family meetings, family discussions to talk about not only our goals and our objectives and our values, but philanthropy and holidays and these type of things. So I really want to open up further and further to them around the organisation. Aspirationally, I want to build a family office in some respects. I've been fortunate enough to deal with many family offices here in Australia, and they're just wonderful people. And they're I've just got nothing but huge admiration for them and respect for them. They have their own challenges, just like every other either family or organisation does. But the insights and the way they think, they are certainly in the top 1%. And it's an incredible privilege to be speaking with those people and dealing with those people. And they're very humble. It's not like they're show ponies or they're extroverted or anything like that. I mean, everyone has their own characters, but just wonderful people to learn from. And I'm just very grateful that I've had a platform to be able to do that. But just going back to your question of, did they have an aspiration, or, did they have an inkling into coming into business? I wouldn't say so. I mean, it might be a 50-50, dad encouraging them versus them. But I think as they've, sort of moved more into the business and had different learning experiences across operations or compliance or tech or sales, etc., trusteeship, they've really started to come into their own and really enjoy the work environment. Actually, I'll caveat this by saying that my youngest son, though, he did Air Force cadets when he was younger, and I did that too, and he rose through the ranks. He ended up being a squadron leader. And so, yeah, he did really well. And he was quite good at rifle shooting. So he was number one in the state that we live in, Victoria, and is number 2 nationally, for that. So he has an aspiration to move into the military, but he's in the business, I guess, in the near term to provide him some cash flow, but also experiences before he looks to move into the military.
And now that all 3 of your children work with you in some capacity, and forgive me for staying on this point for a little longer, but I think it's just such an interesting phase where most business owners have either inherited a business, and I'm talking to the next of kin, or someday want to pass on the business, but you're actively going through and experience. So I'm curious, do you find your children questioning your assumptions, making you reconsider some of the practices at business, or have they not reached that phase yet?
No, Sahin, they certainly are challenging me. So it's probably more challenging me not from a business decision making perspective. They're probably doing it more from a personal perspective. So they do worry about my health, my balance in my life, my mental health, my physical health, these type of things. And so they're like, Dad, go and get a hobby. Is it golf, and go to the gym and try these different things. And I love them for that. I really appreciate their care, because that's, that's where it comes from. They care about their dad. I try and reiterate to them that my hobby is my business, and I don't feel I work every day. I feel I'm pretty lucky, actually, building a platform that allows me to meet great people like you, to have nice lunches, to travel, to give back, to leave a legacy. And I love building and creating things. I love being productive, and that for me is my hobby. Please don't get me wrong. Your mental health and your physical health is extremely important. So yes, I go to the gym, and I practice affirmations and meditation and breathing exercises and these type of things. I mean, I personally, when I was in my corporate world, I worked for large institutions, big banks here in Australia, and I was very good at what I did. In fact, I was number one in derivatives for one of the major banks here in Australia for the market segments that I serviced. But although I was highly performing, I started to suffer anxiety, and I was about 31, 32. And that for me was a real wake up call, in that anxiety can be a physical thing. So you make sure you sleep well and you're hydrated, and you do exercise and these sorts of things. But in my experience, the anxiety was more my mental health. And being in that environment for a big corporate just didn't align with my values. And I thought my integrity was being compromised. I really didn't believe in what I was doing at that point. And so I had to remove myself out of that environment. And that's why I got to a stage where I started my own business. I always had that aspiration of starting a business. But again, as I said to you earlier, the world doesn't owe you anything. You've got to create something that brings value, that is differentiated, that is a compelling proposition to people to work with you. But I myself suffered anxiety that I just couldn't explain. I couldn't understand why I could be sitting here talking to you even, and my heart rate's completely elevated, and I couldn't get words out, and it affects your vision, and you have tingling sensations in your hands, and as I said, you got not only your heart rate up, but you got this tension in your stomach. But what it was I was in an environment that I just didn't truly believe in. My integrity was being compromised. I didn't enjoy, that work environment. And please don't get me wrong. I'm very grateful for the corporate experience that I had, because it's you get experiences and develop skills, knowledge, qualifications, networks that it's incredible. It truly is. But you kind of outgrow that, and you realize that there's more to life than just that. And so, yeah, I understand the importance of mental health and physical health. And so when my kids tell me that, hey, Dad, you're doing really well with work, how about, your health, and, it could be your spiritual health as well. I take on board what they mean. I try and reassure them that, yes, I've got to balance that with, I guess, my personal passion, which is building businesses.
When you were working a corporate job, did you at any point feel your identity was attached to your performance?
Absolutely. I mean, I love success. I love doing really well. I love pushing myself, and yes, certainly your identity gets attached to that in a corporate world. But you realize very quickly that. Well, I realized fairly quickly that you're just on this wheel, this mouse wheel, where you're running really hard, but you're not really moving forward. I mean, the big institutions have got you over a barrel. Your career is determined by them. And what my personal experience too is twice I got made redundant for bad decisions by the corporates that I work with. And so I was collateral damage. And for me, I really wanted to empower myself by starting my own business. So when I started the business, people are saying, "Oh, geez, that's high risk." But in my mind, I was actually de-risking myself. I was empowering myself so that I wasn't determined by other people's bad decisions. And so, yeah, I thought that when I was climbing the corporate ladder, so to speak, that my identity was attached to that type of success. But you realize that's only one type of success. There's different types of success in life. And for me, empowering myself was more successful. being able to determine when I can take holidays, how much I can spend on things, having that freedom and flexibility of choosing. Even the choice of saying no to things to me is a sign of success. But yes, very naturally in a corporate environment, Sahin, you're trying to reach the numbers, you're trying to impress, you're always, you know, sort of managing up, so to speak. But you realise it only gets you so far, and in a big corporate, you're just a number. So yeah, that's where I got to.
I'd like to stretch one of the statements you said a little more and dig deeper. You said saying no is a sign of success. Over the weekend, I read something around that, and I feel that is so relevant. Making sure that you're comfortable saying no and shortening your to-do list so you can stay focused. Could you talk a little more about the philosophy behind the statement you made on saying no being a sign of success, and maybe some experience you might have had around that, if you recollect any?
So, that's actually thank you for focusing on that, but also it's a good point around just staying focused. I think as entrepreneurs, we're always thinking. We're highly active in our minds, and we do something that we're very passionate about. And it's 24/7, and sometimes we can really stretch ourselves too thin and say yes to too many things. We think that being busy is a sign of success. But yeah, you're right. You have to narrow down your focus and ensuring that the activities that you either undertake or agree to are in your wheelhouse or aligned to your values. So I personally, under my company, have multiple different companies, but they're all focused on funds and funds management. But then outside of that, I'm part of industry associations as well as on not-for-profits. And so I certainly am conscious of ensuring I allocate time to those activities outside of work. And I'm always got a sense of giving back. I think if you're in a privileged position, you should be giving back to the community that supported you. But no also means saying no to certain types of clients. It might also mean no to certain types of stakeholders or staff, etc. No, as I said to you, I've said no to capital, and so you need to get yourself into that position where you can say no. I've certainly, when I started the company, I was very happy to get any client. It just validated my proposition. But when I look back at the type of clients that we perhaps agreed to, we've leveled up and we've got rid of a number of clients. I mean, dovetailing into our OPM studies, you've got the chart which Das, you may recall, talks about with the cost to serve versus willingness to pay, and you have these quadrant of clients that perhaps you should be dealing with because they are high cost to serve, but they got a low willingness to pay. And so saying no to those type of clients, if they're not strategic clients, is for me one of the examples of saying no and a sign of success.
You started your business at a point where you had 3 young children. You sold your house and you did not collect a salary for 3 years. Was your family behind you in that decision? Was they supporting you, or is this something you went out on a limb?
Oh no, you definitely need it. It definitely needs your family, and it's your immediate family that I'm really talking about. I think your wider family, really cares about you, and may actually deter you from making that decision, because in their minds it's high risk. In their minds, there's a high likelihood of failure. But if you've got a family that sort of believes in you, and you've got a high conviction on your own self beliefs, as I said, for me it was de-risking. It's certainly not a journey and a pathway that everyone wants to take, and I appreciate that and I acknowledge that. I actually didn't fully understand that when I first started. I thought, why isn't everyone else starting up a business? There's so much freedom attached to it. But actually, the security of a monthly salary, or a perceived security of a monthly salary under a corporate, many people are attracted to. And it's funny because, I've been at this business for 15 years, and those that were sort of encouraging me, I think in the outset, it was very much superficial encouragement. They sort of pat you on the back and go, "Oh, good on you," but I think inside they're like, "Geez, I wouldn't be doing what he's doing. He's a crazy guy." But I'm very grateful for the support that I had from my family. Without that, I just wouldn't get to where I am. And it's not just my immediate family; it's also really close friends. Even my business partner, I've had incredible support from them. And so, yeah, without that, I don't think you can get so far. There's no such thing as a solopreneur in my mind. An entrepreneur is yes, you shouldering most of it, but it takes a team and a community around you. But there's plenty of people rooting for you to fail. They might not say it explicitly, but people want you to do well, but never better than them. And I've certainly experienced that. But yeah, as I said, very grateful for the family's support in my journey.
Said you're now back. You were back at school at a point where your children were at school as well. So walk us through the mindset on what encouraged you or motivated you to apply to the OPM program. How did your kids react to that?
Look, the motivation was a multifold or a number of reasons. I guess I get to a stage in my organisation where I had that ability and that freedom to choose. I'm one for continuous learning and investing in myself and just conducting the research. Just the nature of my organisation and my aspirations was very much aligned to where I want to head. And so when I explained this to the family, there was a whole bunch of pride and joy with my acceptance into the Harvard OPM program. We went out for dinner, and I got a very nice watch for as a congratulations from the family and including my business partner. And I'll be taking them over later this year for my graduation. But yeah, I've always sort of studied on a part-time basis throughout my career. So when I left my year 12, which is the final year here in Australia, I had 3 days off, so I didn't work for 3 days, and I've worked ever since. And so I've just turned 50, literally this month, and therefore I've worked 33 years of my life, and I've done that work full time, and I've studied part time. So I ended up getting a certificate in management, a diploma in financial advising. I did a Bachelor of Commerce with an accounting, commercial or finance major, so triple major, and I've got a CPA. I've done the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. Obviously, I'm doing the OPM program now, and I've done a whole bunch of other sort of industry-related qualifications and certifications. But I've done all my studies sort of part-time, and so probably in some respects, it wasn't a surprise to the family that I've gone down this path. But you do need to be in the right position, mentally, financially, resources in your time. You really do need to, as you know, Sahin, when you're on campus, you really need to focus, and you can't be distracted because of the cases. Are just there's a huge number of cases. But yeah, I don't think they were surprised necessarily that this is the next thing that I was looking to do, and it's probably not going to be the last thing either. There's another qualification I'm undertaking, which is the Chartered Alternative Investment Analyst program. I've done level 1, and there's one other level I need to do, and there's some other things that interest me, particularly around behavioural finance and economics. There's some courses, particularly with the London School of Economics and Political Science, that there's one there that interests me, and there's one here in Australia that I'm looking at as well.
What have been some of your biggest takeaways from your OPM program, or any cases or any professors that have left an impression on you?
Mm-hmm. Well, Dust leaves a huge impression. I think Sahin, he's got a big personality. He commands presence. I think the lecture theatres are his stage, and he's a performer. He cold called me actually on a particular case in the second module called Bugs Berger Bug Killer, which you will do that. You will do that case in module 2, and I can understand why he identified me, because it's around a company that really is in pest control or pest elimination, but the quality of the services and the standards and just the principles of that organisation very much align to my organisation, although I'm in financial services. So the cases themselves are incredible learnings and the insights from the professors. But as you know, the professors will tell you that in fact it's the cohort that they learn from. And what they do is, get bits and pieces from different students throughout their time and just relay that. And they could extrapolate that, and they can build a nice graph or a diagram or a theory that's wrapped around that. But yeah, it's the dialogue in the actual lecture theatres, and obviously the connections that you make outside of the classroom. The living group is just phenomenal. Just getting to know each other is just it's incredible experience. You've got executive coaches, you've got negotiation simulations, you've got pitching sessions. There's just so much that's attached to the program. One thing that I've realised too is, although I've got a relatively small company compared to some of the others in the cohort, like I when I first came, I truly had some imposter syndrome. It was just, holy smokes, what am I doing here? These guys are just incredible. But when you listen and you learn, and everyone's at different stages of their careers and their life cycles and what have you. They're just people like you and me, and everyone has had their own journey, and they've got their own war stories and their scar tissues, and they've had their own crisis, and they've been in the trenches and all the rest of it. And I just think, wow, like in actual fact, I'm not doing too bad, and we're on the right path, and it's quite reassuring actually when I listen to those things. you know, One thing that I've also noticed with entrepreneurs, business owners, founders, family office types is they're very candid, they're very open, they're very raw. They're not guarded. They're very open about some of their experiences, and when you're dealing with that caliber of person, they don't necessarily have the highest IQ, but they are incredible EQ, and I would also argue incredible UQ, which is work ethic. They are hardworking people. They are problem solvers. They develop solutions. They are so resilient. They've got incredible grit, perseverance. These people are incredibly inspiring. And so they're probably the key takeaways for me. Going beyond the lecture theatre and living in the MacArthur wing, and the meals that we have together, and you have incredible conversations with these people that truly inspire you, and you learn from. Please also don't get me wrong. You don't necessarily get along with everyone, but you're getting challenged, and there's different characters and personalities and what have you. But on the whole, it's a very collegiate mindset. People are very open. People are very much willing, for you to have great success. So yeah, I love that environment. Because here in Australia, we have this thing called tall poppy syndrome, which just simply means that people want to help you out if you're down in the dumps, and they want to lift you up. But once you get to a certain level, they don't also want to chop you down. So it's a thing. It's unfortunately here in Australia, the culture, versus in other parts of the world where the entrepreneurial spirit is very much embraced. Risk taking is embraced. Innovation, exploration, entrepreneurship is very much just embraced as a society. Whereas here in Australia, it's not as much. We're very much living in a very comfortable band, income band or lifestyle band. And so if you get too ahead of yourself, there's a thing called tall poppy, which want to chop you down.
What advice would you give your children today if you could give one piece of advice to either the three of them or one each?
Yeah, I'd probably give them this advice already, but just make the most of every opportunity. Don't waste time. Be productive. Unfortunately, children today have got access to phenomenal technology, on their iPhones and their iPads, and they've got YouTube and TikTok and all the rest of it. And those things can be very powerful distractions. You can waste a whole bunch of time on those sorts of things. So what I'd like for them to just go out and really invest in themselves, challenge themselves, go and explore, travel, learn lots of things, meet lots of people, particularly in their 20s. And as you get into your 30s, I'm sure that will start to really play into, their careers and their pathway. I mean, one thing as an example, I've got my kids have started a young professionals network. So my company is called the Silk Group. And so they've started this Silk Young Professionals Network to bring people together around their age to network and, just be on the journey together in their careers. And I think those things will help them certainly in the future. But beyond that, education and, as I said, travel and, interactions with people, really, really important. I mean, AI, as you know, Sahin, AI is playing a massive role in professional services and, white collar industries. And so if everyone's using AI, it's the human that needs to be the point of difference. And it's the relationship that needs to be the point of difference. So they're things that I'm kind of reinforcing to my kids. And I'm sure that'll evolve those, because, we don't know about technologies and opportunities in 5-10 years' time. And so the words of advice today will change in the future. But today I can say to them, really, really make the most of your time while your mind is very malleable, while you can absorb things, read things, learn things, develop things, experiment, explore. These things will be your points of difference. Because AI, technology, it will do the low value things, and you can just get you can just get sort of distracted by those type of things, and let those things sort of overtake you.
Thank you, Koby. In closing, my last question is there a book that you can think of which might have changed the way you think?
Yeah, I've got a number of books, I guess, that I read a lot of books, and so There's a number of books you can read. Well, I'd suggest reading for different reasons. I love a lot of Wall Street books, as an example. Liar's Poker, When Genius Failed, The Smartest Guys in the Room, Black Edge. These books are fantastic. Wolf of Wall Street. I guess many people will have read those type of books. I also like self-help books. There's a beautiful book called "You Can Heal Your Life" by Louise Hay, very famous book. That was very meaningful to me at a certain point in my life when I was experiencing anxiety, as an example, and I learned a lot about affirmations and self-love and building your confidence, etc. Absolutely beautiful books. You got 10x by Grant Cardone, you'd be aware of. But there's a number of books that one can read. The Mindful Entrepreneur. There's so many, Sahin. So I can't say one specifically, but they're just examples of books that I read.
Thank you very much for your time and for reminding me of When Genius Failed, because that is a book which left a huge impression on me as well. I would never bet against those guys, and then just seeing what unfolded, I think, is a good reminder in the kind of times we're living in today.
No, absolutely. Actually, yeah, there's one book I'm reading up at the moment. Oh, there's two books I'm reading at the moment that are relevant to my business. One is called Traction,
Mhm.
and another one is called Scaling Up. So they're more business books that are relevant for me today. So yeah, again, just books are for different purposes, but Scaling Up and Traction are very much relevant to me right now.
Amazing. Thank you, Koby. Appreciate your time so much. I know you have a full day ahead of you now, so thank you for prioritizing this call early in the morning, and I wish you well.
Yeah, you're a beautiful man. Thanks, Sahin, and appreciate the effort, and all the best to everyone out there at the doing the OPM program. Hats off to you for making that commitment, and yeah, I'd love to meet with as many people as I possibly can in time.
Sounds good, Koby. Bye.